Welcome everyone to today's webinar entitled An Overview of Consumer Product Regulations, Standards, Registrations, and Labeling, co-hosted by the American Chamber of Commerce in Cambodia and Tilleke Gibbins Phnom Penh office. Where I would like to invite Ms. Rina Ng, the governor of the American Chamber of Commerce in Cambodia, to provide opening remarks before we begin with today's presentation.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon, distinguished speaker and participant. Welcome to our webinar session. The COVID-19 pandemic has at times disrupted the meetings and seminar in person, but this has not prevented AmCham Cambodia from engaging with our members through the events that are organized virtually or in person to the extent possible. We have also continued updating our members on various legal frameworks. With the valuable support from our speakers and partners, in the last 2 years, we have held various webinars on a number of very crucial topics, including the new investment law of Cambodia. Today, we are very pleased for the opportunity to bring to our members, as well as participants, another webinar on an overview of consumer product regulations, standards, registration, and labeling, with the active support from Tilleke Gibbins. Now that Cambodia has almost fully opened, Tilleke Gibbins and us, we decided to do this online because this is an area that not only businesses that are presently doing business in Cambodia would be interested about, but also the overseas business that are looking into investing in Cambodia. We have today with us as attendant in this webinar companies that are presently doing alcohol and non-alcohol beverage, foods, hair products, as well as other consumer products and service provider in Cambodia. We also happily welcome the attendants who are based outside Cambodia. The understanding and complying with the mandatory standard under Cambodian laws and regulations are very important for the business community, both for local law compliance, as well as for meeting the internal compliance agenda. Further, such understanding and compliance would benefit the consumer and business community for the conduct of the business in a responsible and sustainable way. Mr. David Moore will present to you the standard, registration, and labeling requirements for the consumer products in general, as well as the specific requirements for certain specific regulated products, such as health and food products. He will also elaborate on the applicable penalties and liabilities where there is any breach of such requirements. I'd like to introduce to you our speaker. Mr. David Moore received a bachelor degree in law and a master degree in public international law from University of Amsterdam. He assists both domestic and foreign clients on a matter relating to intellectual property, licensing, regulatory affairs, and doing business in Cambodia. He also has extensive experience advising the private sector on regulatory affairs, product registration, and related enforcement issues. He is an active member of Tilleke Gibbins Life Science Industry Group and a trusted advisor to life science clients seeking to do business, protect the intellectual asset, and protect the public from harmful counterfeit products in Cambodia. David has been recognized as a next-generation lawyer in the legal 500 guide to up-and-coming practitioners in the Asia-Pacific. To maximize the benefit from this webinar, I would like to encourage all participants, especially those who are dealing with consumer products. Please raise your questions, comments, and feel free to share your experience regarding this matter in our Q&A section. Again, I'd like to thank to the participants for your attention. Now, I'd like to pass the floor to David for the presentation of today's topic. Thank you, David, please.
Thank you very much, Alina. That was a great introduction to our webinar today, and we're very happy to have you do the opening remarks as the governor of AmCham in Cambodia. I would like to say thank you to all the attendees today. We see a lot of people online, which is great to see, and we see some familiar names, so that is, of course, a great sight. We would like to also thank AmCham for co-organizing this event with us and hosting us and inviting their members to join this event. So without further ado, I will start the presentation now. So today we're going to discuss consumer product regulations in Cambodia. We will look at the standards, registration, and labeling of products and how they are regulated in Cambodia specifically. We know there's a lot of you that are based in Cambodia, but also a lot of you are based outside of Cambodia, but maybe interested or already selling your products inside Cambodia. First, I'll give you some background on our law firm. We're Tilleke Gibbins, and we are the premier firm for doing business in Southeast Asia. We practice in the areas of law that are essential to doing business. We've identified some of the areas on this slide, and today we will be discussing regulatory affairs. We provide sector-specific, commercially minded advice. We think of your business and we look at your business and we give you advice that is helpful to do your business and helpful to do your business in a legal and lawful manner. We've identified some of the sectors that we specialize in, and today we will be discussing consumer products specifically. We are a regional firm, so we have offices in Southeast Asia, in Cambodia, Indonesia, Laos, Myanmar, Thailand, and Vietnam. But also, if you have any specific business needs in any of the other countries in Southeast Asia, we are happy to help you and identify a local partner to work with. If you have any questions about any of the jurisdictions we have offices in, please feel free to reach out to us, and we are happy to help. We believe that especially today's attendees will be selling products in Cambodia, but perhaps also in other countries. So it might be very helpful that we have offices in other countries that we can help you with. So don't hesitate and feel free to reach out to us. Today we'll be talking about Cambodia specifically, and we will be looking at an overview of consumer product regulations. We'll have two main topics for today, consumer products and regulated consumer products. With consumer products, we mean those products that are generally regulated by horizontal laws and regulations. This means there's not a specific law that addresses your product, or there's not a specific standard addressing your product, but it's more that your product will fall under general laws and regulations. And we call this horizontal laws and regulations because they apply horizontally to all products on the market. One of the key items here would be labeling. So we will discuss the labeling of consumer products, identify some of the key concerns that apply to all products that are sold in Cambodia. Then we'll move on to our second topic, which will be regulated consumer products. So those products that have a specific standard, technical regulation, or another regulation applicable to them, and we'll identify some of the key concerns there. What is a major point is always registration of your regulated product. Normally you have to register a product with the authorities if it's regulated. And the labeling of regulated products can differ from the general consumer products. So this is a bit of the roadmap we'll be addressing today. For the regulated consumer products, we'll have a focus on prepackaged food products, as this would be the biggest group of regulated consumer products in Cambodia. And for the sake of time, we will not address all regulated products, but we will give you some tools to identify if your product would be regulated or not. In this section. So we'll go to the next slide. The next slide will discuss how do you know if your product is specifically regulated. So it can be very difficult to identify if your product is specifically regulated or not. You would need to check if there are any Cambodian standards, technical regulations, laws or regulations applicable to your product. And without proper legal advice, that can be quite difficult. Therefore, we identified a sort of a general rule of thumb to see if your product would be regulated or not. You can check if your product poses any serious health risks or other serious dangers for the consumer or for the general public. So you would have to take a critical look at your product and see, are these dangers and risks there? And if so, it's usually a regulated product. So this is not a law, but it's more of like a general rule that you can follow to check if your product would be regulated or not. Some examples of regulated products in Cambodia are healthcare products, food and beverage, electronics, construction materials, and automotive products, including helmets. It's quite obvious why these would be further regulated, because these products are usually quite risky when used, or they can pose a danger to the public if used in an incorrect manner. So these are usually further regulated by higher standards or clearer quality requirements. But for now, we're looking at the general group of consumer products. So we will look at the horizontal laws and regulations that apply. So for the general group of consumer products, we're looking at products that are not specifically regulated. And generally, these types of products do not require registration with authorities either. This would be any type of product you can think of that doesn't pose an immediate danger. So you can think of a ball pen, a coffee cup, hats, caps, a spoon, anything that is not immediately shows a risk will be still regulated under these horizontal laws. Some of the horizontal laws that apply in the Cambodian framework would be the Civil Code, the law on management of quality and safety of products and services, and the law on consumer protection. And specifically, an implementing regulation under the law of consumer protection is PRACAS 185, which identifies a standard of information for consumers. This is a very important PRACAS, so we will get back to that in a future slide, but we wanted to identify it here already as one of the most important points of law to look at. So we're going to look at product liability. So any product that is sold in Cambodia will have a product liability applicable to it. So product liability means, simply said, that your product, the product that you make, you're responsible for that product. So if I make a product and put it on the market, I'm responsible that this product is safe for use and that the product is not defective. And this is a legal duty. So under the Civil Code and the law on the management of quality and safety of products and services and the law on consumer protection, you have to make sure that the product you put on the Cambodian market is safe for use. In addition, you have to make sure that the product is also not defective. How far this responsibility goes is designed by the law. So the law says for a product to be safe for use, you have to reasonably make sure that the product is safe for use. So if I sell a ball pen or I sell a coffee cup, I can kind of understand that this product is safe for use. For many years, these types of products have been sold on the market. So there's no reason to assume that a consumer cannot safely use my product. However, if I sell a more risky product, for example, I invent a self-driving tuk-tuk, I have to put in more investigation and more research into making sure that this product is actually safe for use before I put it on the market. So it's really product dependent how far the legal duty goes to make sure that the product can be safely used. In terms of defects, this is another concept. A defect means that the product doesn't do what it should do. So I buy a phone today and tomorrow it's not working. That means that the product would be defective. It's not doing what it should do, and that is making phone calls. For a coffee cup, we could say a coffee cup can be safely used on the Cambodian market, but if the coffee cup breaks when you put coffee into it, we can say it's defective. When you sell a product on the Cambodian market, you have to make sure the product is both safe and both free of defects. If you do not make sure, then under the legal duty, you can be held liable for the damages caused by the product being unsafe or the defects of the product. In addition to the damages, you can also be liable for other costs, including the recall of a product. So the local Cambodian authorities may force you to do a product recall because the product is unsafe for use, and all the costs associated with this will be attributed to you as the owner of the product. Some of the penalties include fines, suspended business licensing or trading of the specific product, and you can even be subject to imprisonment. But imprisonment sounds very harsh and scary, but this is only if you would sell a product that you know is very unsafe. So let's say you sell milk that is poisonous on the Cambodian market, you can be liable for imprisonment. However, the legal duty is still there for everyone who makes a product on the Cambodian market. So please make sure your products are safe for use before you start selling them on the Cambodian market. And be aware that if there's something happening with your product, you could be held liable for some of the damages caused by it. And now we're going to look more at the defects of products and what liability applies. So the Civil Code and the Law on Consumer Protection provide for strict liability in regards to defective products. Strict liability is another legal term, and it means that regardless if you intentionally or unintentionally sold a defective product, you can be held liable for any damages caused by the defect. So even if you tried not to sell a product that is defective, if it's defective, you might still be held liable for some of the damages. That's why it's called strict liability. You're strictly held liable. This includes all damages caused by the defects, including all forms of consequential damages. Consequential damages would mean the damages that result as a consequence. So if I sell or I buy a TV today and it catches fire due to a defect, let's say an electric malfunction, and my house burns down, I can claim back the cost of the TV or that burned down, but also the damages caused to my house. So any damages as a consequence are also part of the liability. So this is quite a broad potential liability, and therefore you should take care that the product you sell is safe and free of any defects, including from any parts from your suppliers. So you have to do your due diligence on the suppliers to make sure that the parts they sell to you are safe for use and will not cause any defects to your product. Then under the law of consumer protection, which has been adopted more recently, and the PROCAS number 185, a defective product must be replaced or refunded to the consumer. So this is basically a minimum product liability requirement. So if I buy a phone today and it doesn't work tomorrow because of a defect, then the seller should replace or refund my phone. So this is also strict liability in the sense that there's no interpretation. If there's a defect, you have to replace or refund the product to the consumer. Now we will look at labeling of consumer products and the key concerns that apply to all these products. Again, we are looking at horizontal rules, so the rules that apply to all products in Cambodia. However, if your product is specifically regulated and the specific rule will say something else, you have to follow the specific rule. However, if your product is not specifically regulated, you have to follow the general rules, and these are the ones we are identifying here. So the rules or the laws talk about minimum information requirements. So minimum information requirements basically sets out what is the basic level of information you need to provide to a consumer when they are buying your product or during the purchase or after the purchase. Not all information has to go on the label, but this is the minimum information required you need to provide, and much of it will end up on the label. However, some information may also end up on the product insert or on an instruction manual or other. However, the laws discuss it as minimum information requirements, and they give a bit of freedom to the trader or manufacturer to include it either on the label or elsewhere. So two of the most important laws that set out the minimum information requirements are the law on the management of quality and safety of products and services and the law on consumer protection. Both laws apply to anyone selling products in Cambodia, regardless of the type of product. So going back to the horizontal aspect of the law, and it applies to anyone responsible for putting the product on the market. So even if you are not a registered business, but you're just a seller, these laws would apply. If you are a multinational, these laws would apply, but also if you are a roadside seller with a stall, these laws would apply. So anyone who puts the product on the Cambodian market has to follow these laws. These laws are designed to protect consumers when they're buying the product and also services in Cambodia. And they set out the minimum information requirements for products that are sold to consumers. It basically means that the products and the other, the labeling insert or the packaging must provide this minimum information. And that's either a label, a tag via the packaging, or a QR code or otherwise. So why are these minimum information requirements important? The main goal of the minimum information requirement is consumer protection. That's why most of this information is found in the law on consumer protection. A key part of consumer protection is for the consumer to have sufficient information on the product before, during, and after purchase of the product. This will help the consumer to purchase the product that it wants with the right expectations. It will also help the consumer use the product in a safe and correct manner, enabling the consumer to enjoy the product without risk. The more information you have as a consumer on the product, the better you can make a decision that this is the product you want to buy and you're not buying the wrong product, or you're buying a product that you don't know how to handle or otherwise. So the minimum information really sets a benchmark of information that needs to be provided for the protection of the consumer, that they are duly informed of what they're buying and how it works, and how the warranty applies, what quantity they're buying, and at what price. The minimum information requirements help setting a fair and honest framework for both the businesses to the consumers, but also among the businesses itself. In our view, if you have minimum rules for all businesses that work in the same sector or sell a similar product, you will create a level playing field for those businesses. You're not allowed to mislead or deceive, and you have to be honest about the origin or the quantity or the quality of your products. Setting these minimum information requirements will make sure that all businesses have to apply these rules, and this will lead to a fairer business playing field. For example, if I would sell a product, I would sell a brownie with compot pepper, and someone else down the road sells a brownie without compot pepper, but they call it compot pepper, that would be an unfair business advantage to me as a business. I'm buying a more expensive ingredient for my product from compot. Someone else is buying a less expensive ingredient but calls it the same, and his price can be lower. So that will create an uneven playing field for us as businesses. So in addition to the consumer protection aspect, there's also the aspect that they create a level playing field for businesses. What are these minimum information requirements? Under the law on the management of quality and safety of products and services, any product must provide the following information: composition or ingredients, user guidelines, manufacturing date, expiry date, and any indications which guarantee the safety and health of consumers. The first points are quite straightforward and simple: composition, user guidelines, manufacturing date, expiry date. But then the last point is more open to interpretation. And this is usually where you have to look at your own product and decide, what information do I need to provide to make sure that we guarantee the safety and health of the consumers of my product. The key element is that guarantee. So let's say you sell furniture. Most furniture doesn't have an expiry date, so you would be fine not including an expiry date, because that would not create a danger or give less protection to a consumer. However, you might have a product that needs more information than the list here to make sure that it can be safely used by the consumer. So in that case, we would recommend include additional information. So yeah, take a look at your product and think about what information do you need to provide that information, but at minimum follow these points. So the composition, user guidelines, manufacturing date, and expiry date. However, not all information has to go on the label specifically. So some of this information can be on the label, but user guidelines could be a user manual that is 7 pages long. That doesn't have to be on the label, of course. It could be given inside the product. So you have to make a fair assessment of what information is needed for the consumer when buying and include that information. But the other information can be given on an insert or another place. The law on consumer protection will give a bit more of information about where and how you can give such information. So here we are looking at the law on consumer protection, and this is a newer law than the law previously cited. So this one will give a bit more information about what is the minimum information you need to provide and what and how. So where can it be placed and what language has to be used. The law on consumer protection in Article 23 discusses an information standard. The information standard is determined by PRACAS. So PRACAS 185, which we will discuss soon, is that minimum information standard cited here. And it requires all persons conducting a business in the Kingdom of Cambodia to disclose the minimum information to consumers in accordance with the information standard to be determined by PRACAS. So this one sets the obligation to follow PRACAS 185, which we will discuss next. Article 24 is a similar obligation where it requires any person who conducts a business in supplying or promising to supply or advertising to supply goods or services shall comply with the information standard for consumers. So again, this is the law on consumer protection setting an obligation for businesses to comply and follow the information standard. So what is this information standard? This information standard for Cambodia is currently PROCAS number 185. It's an implementing regulation of the consumer protection, and it provides you with rough guidance on the minimum information standard that is applicable to all products. Article 4 sets out the list of the minimum information standards, and as you can see, it's quite a long list, and it's not always clear what information has to be put on a label or on a product insert. As we discussed earlier, for example, a piece of furniture would not have a expiry date, or would not have, it would not necessarily be relevant to include a manufacturing date. So some of the instructions here given by the law are not very clear and relevant. However, as this is quite a new PROCAS, we expect it to become more clear and clearer in the future what information you need to supply. However, this is better guidance than no guidance. So at least the PROCAS gives us this list to try to include on your product to make sure you meet the minimum information requirement. And again, we're looking at the underlined final bullet point on the right side, which discusses product relevant information. So again, you have to look at your own product and what is relevant for your own product to include. Unfortunately, the law is not 100% clear in providing what you have to do and what you shouldn't do. So there is a bit of leeway for manufacturers and traders to look at their own product and decide what is relevant information that needs to be included. The relevant information could be from this list, but the relevant information could also be outside this list. So if you have a very specific product, you might have to include additional information because it's relevant to your specific product. What are some minimum information requirements, especially applicable to labeling? So the minimum information requirement, as we discussed before, they can be put on the label, they can be put on the packaging or on an insert. However, Article 7 also provides for the option to put it in the QR code. However, thank you. Article 5 would say that the minimum information can be given on the packaging, label, description card, or on the QR code as said in Article 7. So this means not all the information that we discussed before has to go on the label. It can go elsewhere as well. Article 7 provides that only the necessary information has to be on the label or description card. So this is again a requirement that is you can interpret from your own product. You have to look what information is necessary for a consumer to determine, okay, I want to buy this product. That information has to be on the label. The other information can go on a product insert, on the packaging, or as Article 7 says, you can put it in a QR code and provide additional information there. You can use Khmer or foreign characters in the QR code, but the general rule for the PROCAS number 185 is that all minimum information requirement has to be given in Khmer language. So that takes us to the next slide. The next slide discusses some key takeaways of this PROCAS number 185. And what are some key points that you have to look out for from this PROCAS for your consumer product. So the minimum information must be provided in Khmer language. And this is quite an interesting requirement because if we go to a supermarket or we go to any shop today in Phnom Penh, you would probably see many products that do not have all the minimum information in Khmer language. However, the law is quite clear. You have to provide this information in Khmer language, and a foreign language can be given in support, but the minimum information must be provided in Khmer at least. Two other key takeaways are product relevant information generally and necessary information for the label. So we saw Article 4 of PROCAS number 185, which said you have to provide product relevant information. So you have to look at your product. What relevant information do I need to provide to safely use my product and to give enough information about my product? For what has to be put on the label, you have to make a determination what is necessary information. So you can make a determination, this information is necessary, but the rest of the information that is relevant can go somewhere else. So if you're just looking at the labeling aspect, you have to decide what is necessary. Other labeling key takeaways are the label can be printed on, sewn on, stick to the packaging, or the information can be given in a description card or QR code if the label / packaging is too small. Stick to the packaging means that you can use a sticker on the packaging to give this minimum information. So if you have a product currently on the market that doesn't meet all the requirements, you may provide a sticker with this additional information to meet the new legal requirements. The label or description card must be clearly visible, easy to read, easy to understand, and difficult to remove, fade, peel, or detach. This requirement is set so you can't have an excuse that the product labeling fell off your product. You have to make sure the product is, your product label is strong enough that it doesn't detach easily, and it has to be easy to read and easy to understand for the general consumer. The information on the label or the minimum information may be written, printed as pictures or graphics, and displayed on the packaging of the goods. So you have some freedom to decide what type of information do I want to write down and what type of information do I want to show as a graphic. So now we will look at the regulated products. The regulated products are those products that have specific standards, technical regulations, and other regulations applicable to it. So some of these products could be healthcare products or prepackaged food products. So what are considered regulated products for the sake of this presentation? Those products that are subject to specific laws and regulations, or they have a mandatory Cambodian standard or technical regulation applicable to them. Those products that have specific laws and regulations are usually products that are found to be dangerous to health or public safety or pose other risks and are therefore strictly regulated. This could be pharmaceuticals, medical devices, cosmetics, and other health products, pesticides, fertilizer, animal feed, and veterinary medicines, and chemicals. However, there's a whole range of other products that are also specifically regulated. And usually these are part of quite sophisticated industries. So you would say the pharmaceutical industry, pesticides, fertilizer, usually quite a sophisticated industry, and because of the risks that are associated with these products, they are further regulated by the government to curb those risks. However, if you do have a product that is specifically regulated, it's generally quite straightforward to identify where you have to register. We could say for pharmaceuticals and health products, you would have to go to the Ministry of Health. For agricultural products, you would go to the Ministry of Agriculture. For products that have a Cambodian standard applicable to them, you would go to the Institute of Standards of Cambodia. So generally, it's quite straightforward to find out where you would have to go to register and find information about your product. And most of these authorities nowadays have a single window. At the single window, you can ask some questions about the product, how is it regulated, and do I need to register? And generally, they're quite forthcoming with giving information and helping you out to duly register your product or to make sure the product is correctly labeled. But for today's presentation, we will look more on products that are regulated by Cambodian standards, and we have a focus on prepackaged food products. So Cambodian standards are standards that are adopted by the National Standards Council and implemented by the Institute of Standards of Cambodia. Implemented means that the Institute of Standards of Cambodia disseminates these standards and they educate businesses on these standards. Plus, if you have to register your product or certify your product against a standard, you would go to the Institute of Standards of Cambodia and register/certify your product there. What do they do? The technical specifications for products, product composition, and other production processes. This is what the Cambodian standards do. They set either the specifications for your product, so you have to follow these specifications step by step and make sure your product meets the specifications. They may discuss product composition. For example, there is a toy standard, and this toy standard sets what type of chemicals you may use in toys. So it sets some rules for the product composition. However, it doesn't set other technical specifications. So it doesn't tell you how a product should be made or how a toy swing should be made. It only discusses the chemicals used in it. So there will be a standard focused on product composition. Other standards may focus only on the production process. So they may only say, well, you have to follow this particular process during production. And if you do that, you meet the standard. And some of the standards cover all three. Some standards cover technical specifications, composition, and processes. Recently, we have seen authorities adopting technical regulations, and these are generally used to adopt the Cambodian standard as mandatory. Why do we make the distinction between mandatory and non-mandatory? There's over 990 Cambodian standards that have been adopted over the years, but to date, only a fraction is made mandatory. The rest of the standards are still considered as voluntarily, so you may follow them, but it's not mandatory to enter the Cambodian market. Some of the Cambodian standards were declared as mandatory, but in the recent years, they're using a technical regulation to declare it as mandatory. So a technical regulation would mean that the regulation says Cambodian standard number XYZ is now a mandatory standard, but the framework document that is issued would be called a technical regulation. This is in line with how they do it in the EU and in other jurisdictions, where most of the standards are voluntarily and then made mandatory by a technical regulation. The standards that are applied are developed either in Cambodia or they follow ASEAN or other international standards. And the most recent standards generally follow ASEAN or international standards. So they would be a copy of an already existing ASEAN or international standard, and they're just declared as a Cambodian standard as well. So they copy the same specifications, composition, or process requirements, and make them into a Cambodian standard. What this helps is it makes products being uniform in quality and safety, which makes it easier to export your product as well. So if you have a product that meets the Cambodian standard for food additives, which is a copy of an international standard, you can go to another market and already know that you meet the same standard. So the standards are usually generated in countries based on the international standards to make sure, like, okay, all the products and all the trade between these products between countries will be safe and the products will be of good quality. Some examples we have of Cambodian standards that you may have seen in the Cambodian market include the natural mineral water standard, which is CS. CS stands for Cambodian Standard 193, or the bottled water standard, which is Cambodian Standard number 9. The year is usually indicated. So Cambodian Standard 193 was adopted in 2011, and the bottled water standard of Cambodian Standard number 9 was adopted in 2005. However, these standards are usually updated from time to time. So the year of adoption doesn't mean that they are necessarily outdated. They are updated from time to time. So let me show some examples of products that are regulated in Cambodia and that are licensed. So here you would see a mineral water product. So this is a licensed product by the Institute of Standards of Cambodia, and it has been checked against the natural mineral water product standard. You can see it says CS 193, so Cambodian Standard 193, and you see the Cambodian standard mark indicated in the red rectangle. You may have seen these in products that you see on the Cambodian market, and this is the way how products can identify themselves as, okay, we have registered with the Institute of Standards and we do meet the minimum Cambodian standard requirements. So this product is safe for use and it is of high quality or of at least the minimum quality set by the standard. This is another example of a bottled water product, and they meet Cambodian Standard number 9. So Cambodian Standard number 9 is the bottled water standard. And I think this is a product you would see in the market quite often. You may have seen this Cambodian Standard logo already, which helps you identify this product is duly registered. So some of the mandatory Cambodian standards specifically for food products are identified in this list. It's vinegar, fish sauce, bottled drinking water, chili sauce, soy sauce, ice, natural mineral water, and instant noodles. So if you make any of these products, you're definitely subject to a Cambodian standard. And the Cambodian standard provides what type of additives can go into your product, what production process you have to follow, It usually discusses what labeling you need to follow, and it requires you to register with the Institute of Standards of Cambodia to make sure you meet all those requirements. All these products, when available on the Cambodian market, should therefore also wear that, have that Cambodian standard logo on it. Other standards that are also mandatory and maybe relevant for some of the attendees today are electronics, cars and motorcycles, helmets, construction, toys, so the chemical composition of toys. And also recently they adopted a Cambodian standard on IT systems. So the minimum requirements that an IT system must meet. We expect some new rules to be enforced soon as well. And these standards will cover eggplants, pumpkins, jackfruits, and carbonated beverages. However, if your food product is not on this list, it means a Cambodian standard is not applicable specifically. However, you might still be regulated under the horizontal standard. So in Cambodia, any pre-packaged food product, so a product sold in a packaging, so not a raw product, but a pre-packaged food product, they're all subject to horizontal standards. So these are standards that apply to any type of pre-packaged food product. And this means that all these types of products also have to register. Some of these horizontal Cambodian standards that are applicable include the first Cambodian standard adopted in 2000, which sets labeling or the labeling requirements of prepackaged food products. There's Cambodian Standard 93, which discusses food additives. And there's Cambodian Standard 115, which discusses bottling and packaging for edible products made of PET. What this means is that all products that are a food product have to meet these Cambodian standards. So if I sell a prepackaged food product, it has to follow the labeling requirements. It has to follow the general standard on food additives. And for any packaging I use, if it's PET, it has to meet the standard as well. So even if you don't have your product does not appear in the previously shown list with mandatory standards, then you would still be required to follow the horizontal standards. There are also some horizontal regulations applicable, and these horizontal regulations basically state that you have to register your product with the Institute of Standards of Cambodia. If your product needs to obtain a certificate of free sale or a certificate of hygiene, you would need to also register at the Department of Drugs and Food. Interestingly enough, if we go to a market now, you would see that many products would not be registered, duly registered, but this requirement to register has been adopted a long time ago. So our advice is if you have a prepackaged food product in Cambodia, please make sure to follow the Cambodian standards that are applicable, label it correctly, and register your product with the Institute of Standards. So we will now discuss the registration process. We will generally look at the product registration of prepackaged food products as discussed, but we'll identify some other elements of registration for other products as well. So if your product is subject to a mandatory Cambodian standard, either specific or horizontal, so either one of the specific standards you need to meet, or you have a prepackaged food product that needs to be needs to meet the Cambodian standard, you have to make sure that you register your product at the Institute of Standards of Cambodia. At the Institute, they basically certify that your product meets the Cambodian standard. So it's we call it a product registration, but it can be seen as a certification process as well. If you duly register your product, it means that the product label should then carry the Cambodian standard mark, the safety mark, or the CBP or Chorbopor registration mark. So on the left, we see the Cambodian standard mark that we saw on the water bottles. If you see that logo, it means that the product is subject to a specific standard and it meets those specific requirements. If you see the middle logo, it means it's the safety mark. The safety mark is generally used for electronics, helmets, automotive products, etc. So that is more for non-food products to ensure that the product is safe for use. On the right, we see the Chorbopor, which means the product registration mark that is used for prepackaged food products that are not that are not regulated specifically. So most of the food products that are not the mineral water, that are not instant noodles, they will have this chorbo pour mark followed by a registration number. So when you need to register your product at the ISC, you have to prepare a dossier. For prepackaged food products, we can share the registration requirements here. And we have some general comments that the hardest part would be assembling the correct documents, especially if you have an import product. You would need to get documents from your foreign manufacturer to prove that the product is safely made abroad. These need to be notarized, and you need to assemble this in a dossier and submit it to the ISC. So the list of documents as we provide here, you can see it's quite extensive. And for electronics or helmets or cement, similar requirements would apply to make sure that the product can be duly certified by the ISC. And when they issue the product registration mark, they do it on the basis that the product is duly safe, meets the requirements, and is worthy of carrying the chorbo pour mark or the product registration mark. We must say that in our recent meetings with the ISC, they've always been very helpful on providing us with guidance on defective documents. So if you are a trader in Cambodia, you want to register your product with the ISC, but you don't have a perfect dossier, you can go to the ISC and they will give you some guidance on how to prepare the document in the correct manner. Some of the registration documents for food products include an application form where you have to declare the name of the applicant, who is the manufacturer, the raw materials that go into the product, the production flow and the production process, and other information. Then you have to provide the incorporation and licensing documents of the local entity applicant. So it means the local company that is responsible for putting the product on the Cambodian market needs to submit their incorporation documents and the documents that shows they're correctly licensed as a business. This also means for anyone who's not based in Cambodia, your products will have to be registered by a local distributor or a local entity. You can either set up your own entity or work with a local distributor, but the license, the ISC product registration license, may only be held by a local entity. If your product is produced abroad, you would need to show a sale agreement from the foreign manufacturer to the local entity. This is to protect any foreign manufacturers, to show that the local entity does have the power to sell the product in Cambodia and that they have the power to register the product in Cambodia. Where applicable, you have to provide a free sale certificate from the country of manufacturing. So if the product is made in Austria, you need to show a free sale certificate that says the product would be safe for sale in that country. So then the Cambodian authorities can see, okay, the product has been certified as safe in that country already. There is an opportunity to get a free sales certificate from the DDF in Cambodia, and we think that in the future the ISC will also ask for a free sales certificate from the DDF, but at the moment this is not yet a requirement. Then you would need to submit some certificates of the manufacturer to show that they duly have the right processes and meet the general good manufacturing practices, etc. That they produce the product in a hygienic manner. So these are ISO or HACCP certificates. If you have a registered trademark for your product, you have to submit these too, and you have to submit test reports. So the test reports are quite important. You have to do a microbiological analysis of the product to make sure it is safe for use. And you have to do a chemical analysis of the additives in the product to show that you meet the additive standards. So some of the horizontal standards cover food additives, and this chemical analysis will have to show you meet that standard. Then you need to submit a sample label or a sample of the product itself. Some of the companies we work for do not have the sample product yet because they still have to get the label approved first. So they submit a sample label and not the product yet. But other companies already have a product prepared for the Cambodian market, and you can submit the whole sample in one go. The last required document would be the license of the manufacturer, either in Cambodia or abroad, and to show the list of machinery and the production flow chart. Then when you get to the ISC, this would be the general flow chart of the registration process. So step one would be to submit the correct supporting documents, application form, and pay the official fee, of course. Then the legislation department of the Institute of Standards will review the application, and they will issue the product mark registration license. During the process of review and issuing the approval, they will check against either the Cambodian standard that is applicable or the horizontal standard that is applicable. So for prepackaged food products, the ISC would look at your label and check if it meets Cambodian standard 001. So we will look at the labeling now in more detail. Most regulated products would have their own specific labeling requirements as mentioned in the laws and regulations that should be followed. So cosmetics have their own labeling requirements. So if you sell a cosmetic, you have to follow those specific requirements. For pharmaceuticals, it's different again. And then for prepackaged food products, it's different again. Here we're looking at prepackaged food products. And the standard that they would apply there is Cambodian standard number 1. And this was adopted by APRACAS in 2000. So this is a mandatory Cambodian standard that you have to follow. And we identify some of the key features below. It's a general food labeling standard applicable to all prepackaged food products. And it's available online in English and Khmer. The language is quite straightforward. And it's quite clear what you need to do and what you need to put on your label. So we're not going to set out each and every requirement because it's quite long. However, we want to highlight that a key feature is it requires the labeling to be in Khmer. As discussed before, many of the products currently on the market do not have Khmer labeling, but it would be a legal requirement to have your product labeled in Khmer. In addition to the minimum information standard under the Consumer Protection Law, which also requires Khmer labeling. So we expect in the coming years, we're going to see more and more Khmer labeled products on the market. Foreign language is allowed on the label, but it should be in supplement to the Khmer, or it should be, the Khmer should be the dominant language. So when we submit a label to the ISC, they request us to put the Khmer on top of the English. So Khmer comes first and English comes after. Because the Khmer labeling requirement would make sure that the product should be labeled in Khmer and foreign language is only in support. So the dominant language should be Khmer. For imported products, you may use a sticker for the Khmer language labeling, but it should be placed very prominently on the product. So it should not be placed in the corner of the product. It should be placed in the middle of the product, and it should meet all the labeling requirements in Khmer. And as said in the previous slides, the Institute of Standards of Cambodia will check against the labeling standard during the registration process. And what we usually do is we prepare a label, go to the ISC and ask for their feedback before we finalize the label. The label has to be manufactured. So oftentimes you want to be sure the label is acceptable before you start manufacturing. So we usually recommend our clients to either send us or themselves go to the Institute of Standards of Cambodia, present a draft label and request their feedback and see if it meets the legal requirements.